Welcome to Supercool, the show about low-carbon innovations now scaling. Each week we talk with the founders, CEOs, and executives who are winning customers, growing revenue, and capturing market share by turning carbon-cutting ideas into competitive advantage. This is the rise of the low-carbon economy, a multi-trillion-dollar transformation already underway. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. Trees are coming down in cities faster than many realize. Street by street, storm by storm, the volume is staggering. Tens of millions of trees every year. Some are salvaged, but most are chipped, burned, or buried. A $300 billion forest products industry in the US keeps running on virgin timber while usable material disappears into the waste stream. All that carbon dioxide trees were storing releases right back into the atmosphere. And wood touches nearly everything we build. But the industry behind it hasn't changed in decades. It's the oldest material in modern construction and one of the least digitized. The entire system still runs on paper tickets, phone calls, and trust. Thousands of small operators, arborists, mills, haulers, contractors work independently with no shared data or visibility. Once a tree leaves one set of hands, no one has a high-level view of where it goes next. Ben Christensen, Cambium's co-founder and CEO, understands that fragmentation. Cambium's goal is simple to say, but hard to pull off. Build the first tech-native forestry company, one that makes reuse perform on par or better than cutting down new trees. In effect, Cambium is building a 21st century supply chain, connecting tree removal companies, haulers, sawmills, manufacturers, and big brands through a shared data layer that provides visibility from start to finish. Over 500 companies across the US and Canada are moving and tracking each tree from removal to finished product, forming what's becoming a just-in-time delivery system for reuse. It's salvaged trees at venture-backable scale. It's almost taken as gospel today that the goal of any startup or corporate initiative is to simplify problems, narrow the scope, strip away anything messy, especially if it touches the physical world. Cambium does the opposite. It leans into the complexity of the wood economy, the logistics, regulations, and multiple layers of government, city, county, state, federal, as well as the highly localized networks of companies in the industry. Ben believes that mastering that complexity is what gives Cambium its moat, its defensible advantage. And that tracks with my own experience founding Planted to make carbon-negative building materials from fast-growing grass that can replace trees. By verticalizing our supply chain, establishing our own climate crop, and building the first-of-its-kind production technology to turn grass into structural panels and studs, we learned that mastering complexity creates the kind of defensibility even the largest companies can't easily follow. In Cambium's case, the IP isn't just in the software. It's in the relationships, with every company added to the platform, the knowledge sharing, the interconnections, and the ability to operate fluidly at the local, regional, and national levels. Cambium has built the processes to turn complexity into an advantage. Ben is also an extreme endurance athlete, running 100-mile races. That discipline isn't about sheer willpower. It's about managing complexity through process. The same mindset, planning, pacing, building systems that sustain over the long haul, is what he's now instilled into Cambium. Here's my conversation with Ben. Ben, welcome to Supercool.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
I've been looking forward to talking to you since we started putting this project together a year ago, knowing that you are operating a space that I was operating in for a number of years with Planted, and I know we connected back then, but we've never really had a chance to certainly exchange notes and have the kind of conversation that we're going to have today. So really excited to dig in, talk about Cambium, hear a little more about your background, some of those pivotal moments that have brought the company where it is today and where we're going from here. So with that, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about you and kind of the genesis and what Cambium's all about?
Sure. Well, really excited to be here. Obviously, we've been circling around this conversation for a bit, so it's good to finally dive in. At Cambium, our goal is to be the first tech-native forestry company that is focused on being better for people and better for the planet. We do that really by trying to prioritize the reuse of materials within the broader wood supply chains and then really building technology to serve wood products generally. I just grew up in forestry. My dad was a construction worker carpenter. I grew up in a town of 200 people out in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico and had no central heating, had to cut wood every summer, and spent a lot of time in high school and then in college working hands-on in the forestry space. And so really got an understanding for the industry and clearly understood that there is a key gap in technology within the space. And obviously this is a big legacy industry. Wood's in everything. It's all around us. It's almost $1 trillion global industry. And there's really big gaps in terms of modernizing it and building technology in it. But you have to really understand the industry. And so that's one part of the puzzle. And then the other part of the puzzle for me and what I grew up in and how the dots connect is my mom was a hydrologist. So I grew up in New Mexico. Water in the West is a constant issue. And from a really young age, understood the impacts of climate change and really saw my life's work as trying to address that as much as possible. And so the second piece of really trying to improve the space that I love, the outdoors, forestry, and the wood products industry overall, is all about how do we actually make that more sustainable. And for us, a lot of that is about reusing material at massive scale. So we actually, as a country, as a globe, we waste tons and tons and tons of material, and we help capture that and really bring it to market in bigger ways. And then our whole goal is to also build out the data layer to actually be able to facilitate transactions and the forestry market in much more efficient ways overall. So that's the highest level on how it started from a really young age and how I've gotten here. There's some more dots along the way, but really excited to be in the spot now.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Ben. One of those moments that stood out to me as I was getting ready to talk to you and just doing a little background research, I heard you talk about a moment when you were doing your grad studies at Yale. I think the name has changed, but Yale School of Forestry. Is it Yale School of Forestry, Forestry Management? Have they? That school.
I still call
venerable
it Yale
school.
Forestry.
There we go. The venerable Yale Forestry School. And you were talking about this moment. You had this idea. You had either early partners, maybe co-founders. I don't know if they're still with the company, but there were 3 of you working on this concept at Yale, and you won a grant from the Nature Conservancy to start to talk with cities about this challenge of, hey, all these trees are coming down. I think it's something on the order of like 36 million trees, right? Half the trees we use in the United States in a given year. You got the opportunity to kind of put that out to cities, expecting maybe some might want to work with you, and you got a response back from all these major cities saying, yes, we want to work with you, we want to know. And that just struck me as such a fascinating moment to recognize, gosh, the urgency of this problem and the pain I think that people feel. It's like visceral pain that people understand when trees that come down and get chipped or go to a landfill. It almost physically hurts in some way for people. They just know this is like not right and not good. We should do something. And for me, when I heard that, I was like, wow, that just must have been a fascinating moment for you.
Two big things from that moment. One was the sort of entrepreneurial experience of being in grad school, trying to think about these problems, trying to figure out how we can make impact in the space, but then putting something out and having so many cities resoundingly say, this is a massive problem for us, and wave the flag and say, actually, this is a thing we really need help on. We don't know how to solve ourselves, and we're looking for support. And that was such a big indicator and momentum builder to us that we were on to the problem. I don't think we were thinking about it in the right way at that point, but we had figured out there is a problem in this space, and there's so much volume and there's so much fragmentation, and that's really the big reason for it. And the second piece that was part of my experience is I grew up in wood, but I always thought that salvaged wood was just like this little niche thing. Of course, you'd see a tree come down once in a while and you'd be like, I wonder what they're doing with that, but you don't really think about it. And one of the experiences of starting a company, and then we've shared this experience with so many people who follow the company, with our employees, with our customers, is that now when they move around a city, you actually see trees coming down all the time. And once you start to notice that, you're like, what are we doing? This is such a waste. And so as we started to see that more and more, and then started to dive in and see the scale and actually get into the process with cities, we started to realize, wow, the volume of this material is gargantuan, and there's a huge, huge opportunity here. And there's also a lot of reasons it's not being reused right now, because it's really hard. There's a lot you have to figure out in the process because you're dealing with a waste stream that is really, really fragmented.
When I had the radio show, this other platform, The Lazy Environmentalist, probably 2 decades ago, I remember being very animated by this idea, like you're describing, when we come across a company like Urban Tree Salvage or something that actually was trying to figure this out in one locality. I think that company might have been in Toronto. And saying, okay, all these trees are coming down in our city. Sometimes it's just like, well, a new building is coming up, we'll cut down the trees. It's like, well, that's a wonderful, beautiful tree. Let's figure out how it goes somewhere to get processed. But sometimes it's like something comes down, it's like, oh, that thing's beautiful, but it's got some nails in it, or it's got some other issue with it. It's not as clear cut. But there was always something delightful in that idea of, oh, these trees are coming down, let's figure out a way to do it. We can do certain things ourselves as like smart people at Cambium. We can actually start to become almost like a mill ourselves, or we can actually start to gather materials and we can start to go get some really big customers, which I know you've done, Room and Board, and some other really impressive customers that have shown early traction for the idea, and that you guys can actually scale to a level to convince stakeholders and investors that you're really on something. That's one awesome piece. But that business has some limitations, right? That's not really a venture backable. It could be a wonderful business. You could have a fabulous living and do a lot of good, but it's not going to deliver venture returns. It's not going to transform, like you've said, almost a global $1 trillion industry. Walk us through what Cambium does, what the evolution has been in terms of the product that you offer, revenue streams, how you think about the business, and what you're working on.
When you're thinking about sales, when you're thinking about entering a new space, when you're thinking about community partnerships, we really try to espouse the belief and really live the belief of listen first. And for me, that's a deep recognition that I don't know everything. I've got some ideas, but often they are wrong, and really trying to come in and enter a space where you're really learning very actively. And so when we started working with these cities, what we were hearing is that they have a ton of volume of material. They don't actually know where it is. And oftentimes they are not actively involved in what happens to it. They're sort of saying, hey, we've got this big area around a city. Maybe there's a pest coming in, like emerald ash borer. Good examples like Hennepin County in Minneapolis, where they're taking down 1 million ash trees in the next several years. So they've got this huge volume of material that's coming. They don't really know exactly where that material is going to go or what's going to happen to it. And they have some ideas, but to start putting that into a place where you can really reuse it, it requires a number of things. And so as we started to get into it, we thought, there's all of this wasted material. How do you start to reuse it? And what we really quickly started to realize is there's a number of these local partners, really amazing, super, super smart, great local businesses that are doing some of that reuse. They're taking, a select number of trees, turning them into often like the Live Edge conference table. And that's awesome. And that's also where we started learning in that space. But what they didn't have is they don't have scaled demand. And the real limitation was we had a lot of these mills saying, yeah, we turn down logs all the time. Folks want to bring us a log so that we could reuse it, but we don't have a place to put it. I'm not sure if we can sell it. So we're only going to take, the best of the best and stay in this niche market. And so our whole goal and what we realized was you have to create demand pull through. And that was the first recognition. And so in the earliest days, that was testing it with an $18,000 cutting board Kickstarter out of my apartment in New Haven. And then we started to really try to work with folks to actually source more of that sort of custom table space. And then what we realized is there's a big opportunity to source a material that's much more scalable. Think dimensional lumber that can then go into all of these products. But what you really need to figure out there is time. So sequencing is such a challenging issue here. If you try to have an intervention point with the arborist who's already got the tree, they just took down a tree in front of somebody's house, and you try to shift them at that point, it doesn't really work because they've just got to get the next job. They already chip it. That's not the time to really reuse that material. And what you really need is you need to get in at the front end. So we do lots of work with cities and counties and property owners to say, hey, when you're thinking about your tree removal plans, dealing with disasters, thinking about that material, set up a reuse plan from the front end. And then the other side of that timing and sequencing is really working with demand partners where you've got a longer cycle where you can say, hey, we need 1 million board feet of this type of material, but we need it in 18 months. And that then allows you to really pull that material into the process overall. So that's what we've really discovered and built our business model around. And then I think the last point, which is where we're really focusing on scaling, and this starts to connect the dots from the sort of bespoke local to the really big scalable platform, is I'm a huge believer that if you're going to really deliver impact and you're going to do that at scale, you have to win on product and experience. Simple core business challenges. And I think that for us as a business, we're in a really big growth mode. Obviously, this has been a very challenging moment for many different companies in climate. And we've seen our revenue really grow very significantly this year. And that's largely because we are so focused on better price and a better experience for the end customer. We're a public benefit corporation. We're all about climate. That's my whole life and background. But what we are really focused on winning on is if we can deliver a better product to customers, then we can make it easier and we can deliver better pricing. Then we make that sustainability choice easy. So that's a big part of how we're thinking about scaling and really growing the platform. So that's the dots that connect to get us to where we are today.
All right, cool. So let's just drill into some of that for a bit. And let's just walk through that chain of sequencing that you mentioned. If you're going to go to a city, some geography, and say, look, we want to work with you. Here's what we do. We're building the infrastructure to be able to handle this. Who are you going to when you say, we want to collaborate with you to set up that reuse plan for your trees? Like, who are the entities that you engage with to try and get that type of thing in place at the outset so you can have a lens into, all right, we know there's a lot of variables here in terms of predictability of supply, but if we can create enough redundancy here or enough partners in the system, then we can start to have more insight and planning capability. So what does that piece look like? Who are those people you're talking to?
The way I view the market and the reason that there is so much waste in the space is largely because of information failure. The right people don't have the right information at the right time. And so when we think about how do we actually engage with the different stakeholders, we are trying to engage with essentially as many folks as we can on the front end to get better data and to understand that. So when you think about who we actually work with, we work at the federal level with partners at U.S. Forest Service and sort of more broadly there. We work at the state level with states like Oregon, and we work at the county level, we work at the municipal level, and then we also do a lot of work in the private sector where you're thinking about big companies that are building new offices or data centers or warehouses. When you think about companies doing new development, we really plug in a lot of different spaces. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to get as much data as possible on where material is coming down, how it's coming down, and all of that then starts to feed into, okay, who can reuse it? And then how does it actually connect into an end customer? And how do we do that so that you get better product and better price? So on the front end, we gauge across scale there, and that enables us to move that pretty quickly.
Wow. That must be so fun. I would just think that would be so interesting, some of those conversations. I mean, what's running through my head, Ben, is I spent 8 years living in Asheville. Asheville was severely impacted by Hurricane Helene, and I'm thinking, well, a lot of trees came down. Maybe they did have a plan, maybe they didn't, but in that situation, yeah, you're probably going to work with the county a little more than the city, but you'd want to have those connections in place in markets, I assume, where you're active as you're probably increasingly rolling out nationally. Is that a fair way to think about it?
We actually have done a lot of work with Hurricane Helene salvage, which I can't quite talk about yet, but super soon we're going to have a lot more information there. But I actually think it's a really interesting case study just to highlight in that we're working, again, federal level, state level, sort of community, city, county level. And then we're also doing a lot of work with the private side. So if you think about how this actually works, Hurricane Helene comes in, tons and tons and tons of canopy loss, tree loss impacted by that storm. Then you all have these trees down. It's not like the county has the infrastructure to go deal with that. What they're going to do is they're going to contract out, and that contracting takes a bunch of different forms. One of the biggest levers of change that we're trying to get is to prioritize reuse within those contracts, but that is a longer term legislative pull. In the near term, what we do is we engage with those actual private entities, companies that are getting hired, the tree care services that get hired to say, all right, we've got a bunch of logs that are across the road here. Those need to be gone. And then we partner with them to say, hey, instead of just chipping those on site, paying the money to do that, or paying the money for disposal fees at a landfill, bring them here, and then we'll actually help reuse them. And so that's also part of our intervention is engage private and public all at the same time.
Cool. And now as I'm thinking about it, you can see who has those contracts, you get historical data, you know where developers are going, you probably have a sense of, okay, here's the trees came down, and you start to map that out. Again, that just sounds so fun, like so interesting. I'd just be like, here's the control room, here's where all the trees are. I think that would be awesome. But okay, on the sequencing, you get a handle on, okay, here's where trees are coming down. It's either there's development, there's storms, there is disease, there is probably a couple other things that I'm missing, but trees are coming down. We're going to put some infrastructure in place, put the relationships in place. And then you talk about demand partners. And so when you say, just as an example, we want to go build relationships with companies that can say to us, or maybe it's the government, I don't know, but someone who could say, look, 18 months from now, we're going to need 1 million board feet of XYZ. Who are the kinds of companies that are doing that type of planning into the future, or the types of organizations that you're working with as you pull this kind of logistics chain together?
So we really sell material into three broad categories. So we sell material into mass timber. So that is a structural component for building big commercial buildings, data centers, buildings. So that's selling largely softwoods into, an industry that's going to turn them into big buildings. We then sell material into millwork. So that is flooring, cladding, siding, a lot of different elements there that go into a house or into a commercial building that are non-structural. So think architectural elements. And then we really sell material into furniture. And so we have these three different verticals. And to the point about sequencing and timing, the whole thing that is a balancing factor is you've got long sales cycles in this process because you also have long build cycles. So if you're going to launch a new product as a furniture company, you're going to do a ton of R&D, you're going to test it. That doesn't happen in weeks, it happens in months or years. If you're building a massive new warehouse, again, same thing. That's going to be 3 years oftentimes, if not longer, in that process. And so that sequencing is there. And what we've really focused on and been focusing on unlocking is actually going and selling directly to these large end customers. So really building out the muscle, the distribution, and the ability to work with large end customers. Today, those large end customers don't think about the wood that they buy. That gets passed down into the value chain. So part of our value proposition is, hey, you can buy directly from us. We are going to make sure your supply chains are optimized for sustainability. We're going to make sure they're optimized for data, so you have full reporting and transparency. We're going to make it easy for you, and then we're going to make sure that you get the best priced. And then we're going to essentially reduce the sort of marginal addition from all of those extra players in the process and sell to the end customer directly. And that creates that sort of pull through, that motion. So the short answer is most of the large companies who are using wood, they actually have plenty of time to do it. It's just that today they aren't really thinking about it, and it ends up being something that, it gets put into a building plan, and then much, much later in the process does anybody actually call somebody to try to buy wood. And so then you're working on this last minute, and you have this commodity industry that is focused on, do I have enough inventory at the right time? And our whole thesis is, well, you can really actually do this as just-in-time manufacturing, and that's fundamentally what we do.
I love it. It's very interesting to me, the categories you mentioned. So some of those categories, I assume, thinking about it from the lens of planted, where we're just basically trying to replace oriented strand board, and we're at the bottom of the barrel in terms of commodity, cheapest product, and really trying to build a business to work at that level. These are also really big markets that you're in. There is price sensitivity, but I would think we've also talked to a bunch of furniture companies as well, and that may be another conversation maybe you and I have offline, because we've definitely gone down that path too. But there's probably a little more flexibility or a little more room, maybe some margin in some of those other categories if you're looking at mass timber and some of these other types of products. When you say, for example, which I love, okay, we're a B Corp, we're all about climate, your whole background's climate, but to get to the scale and to really transform an industry, you need to win, as you said, product and experience, or better price, better performance. That's how you're going to actually create impact. And the nice thing about businesses like Cambium is the more revenue you make, the more impact you're having because they're intertwined. Yeah. There's no daylight between those two. So when you say better price, better product, what does that mean? The price I can kind of understand. It's like, look, we know where the price is in the market. We got to hit that or just be on point. What do you mean in terms of product, delivering a better product experience?
Sure. Fundamentally, what we are really trying to deliver is, people like products that are easy. And when you think about buying wood today or buying fiber generally, it's usually pretty complicated. And there's a few different parts of that. One is it's largely not tech enabled. So mostly if you are going to get wood delivered or you're going to buy it, you're often on the phone, long conversations, trying to understand, hey, can you get me a bid for this? Here's the specific SKUs that I need. This is the type of material that I need. There's often a delay in that process. So you don't really have price visibility. You're not able to understand quickly, I'm looking for this type of material. What are my options? How much would that take? And so one is really creating and speeding up the whole process of figuring out, if I want this, I can get it for this price and, really optimize it. The second, in terms of better experience, is being able to actually improve the communication, the ordering plan. And so we have a buyer side portal where folks are able to see where their material is, to actually track it, to make sure that it fits within their process. And then the last piece that we're really working on developing now is the payments component. And when you think about how most industries work, and we do this as individual consumers, lots of industries have started to have a sort of real payments provider that optimizes for the industry dynamics, enables financing, a bunch of those other sort of components where your money goes further as a customer and actor in the market. We are working on developing that. And again, by having that demand, we can really pull through payments where when we own the demand, we can help sawmills drive onto our platform. We can help tree care services, and we can sort of pull the industry onto that overall. And so that's the highest level. And then I think the last thing, which is our core goal, is to really be able to deliver better price. And the way you do that is by having supply chain optimization where material isn't traveling as far, so you improve your unit economics. We're able to reuse a lot of material, so you have lower input costs. And then when you're really driving economies of scale in the right sort of operation so that you don't have inventory costs as well. And so still a long way to go on that to really drive that to scale. But in most of our products, we're price competitive today. And what we're really pushing for is to be able to win on price and to be able to scale.
I appreciate all of that. So much of that tracks with what we've been working on and what we've been thinking about with planted and carbon negative building materials, and trying to think like, can we win in the field? Can we win in the logistics and the supply chain by shrinking that supply chain? Can we win on the processing side by rethinking the economics of what manufacturing looks like and the investment and all that stuff? It sounds like a very familiar thesis. So let's carry that forward. You mentioned getting different players onto your platform, different parts of the supply chain. So the thing I know that is so exciting to you, to the industry, to supply chain partners, the businesses within the supply chain, I think to your investors, is this idea of saying, we all hate it when trees come down. And I know this, like when we go talk to builders, and builders who are mainstream, really big builders doing a lot of volume, and we talk about, hey, we're going to replace trees with grass with our planted materials. And they're like, awesome. I hate the fact that trees come down. I'm still doing it. I'm probably going to keep doing it unless you can do exactly what you're talking about at Cambium, right? Like same price, same performance, or better. But I hate the fact that I'm doing it, and I'm really aware. But there's something so appealing about saying, we're going to go be in this industry. We're actually going to go create some products. We're going to go actually do it ourselves. So we really understand the pain and the choke points and the issues that every company has to deal with along the supply chain. And then we're going to build this software layer that's going to try and remove the fragmentation and kind of unite these different players into something far more unified, transparent, visible than what exists today. So we can really turn these knobs, everyone can win, and we get all the benefit that we want. So walk me through, Ben, that evolution. I mean, maybe that vision was there from the beginning. I would guess there were probably inklings of it and some vision, and then saying, oh gosh, okay, how are we going to get to that? Oh, well, we'll figure it out along the way. But walk me through that kind of process of how you started to envision what you could do, what a software layer might unlock and enable, and really where you're going today.
Going back to why we named Cambium. Cambium is part of a tree. It's the growth layer. So if you think about a tree ring, it's the part of the tree that is actually growing every single year. And what the Cambium layer does is it grows and then it connects across different scales. So it connects the roots to the leaves. And that's fundamentally what we are trying to do as a company, and really believe that our purpose and our sort of value in the world and in the market is to do that connection and to enable that growth in a much bigger way. And so what that actually means and how we sort of got from, hey, the local hands-on scale to the big macro scale is, I certainly feel this reflected in my own journey. At the beginning, I grew up like super, super hands-on, chainsaw in the woods, doing it from that side. Understood the industry. And one of the biggest things I believe, and we've seen a number of companies who have come and tried to sort of build tech in this industry, particularly from the software side, that don't understand the industry at all, that don't understand how physical products work, that definitely don't understand how you have to build trust and consistency and value in this industry. And they haven't worked. They have fundamentally missed because they don't understand how it actually works. And so one of our core beliefs, and you're touching on that, is you have to be hands-on. So that's part of why we invest in our own R&D pilot plant, which has been growing significantly in Baltimore. We really live out the actual process every single day of moving material. And then I think the other side of thinking about it from the macro is, if you look at like wood broadly, there's just a lot of different ways in which we source fiber. And some of that is great. Like there is sustainable forestry that is really good and is done really well. there is lots of forestry that is not done really well. And then there's some forestry that's done that is horrible and really, really bad. And so when I think about what we are trying to do is we're trying to take that bottom 25 to 35% in the market and replace that with a much better top 25 or 35%. And I think that's very similar to what Planet is doing. You're not going to replace every sort of fiber in the market, but if you can get rid of that really sort of low, super harmful piece, then you can do that at massive scale. And so I was coming from this background and working in it really tactically. And then I also worked on federal policy, thinking about forests as sort of this big policy concept. And fundamentally, to do anything at scale, you got to really live both. And so that's how we think about it as a company, is we're really trying to connect across scales. And I think to build technology, to build data, to actually build a product, you have to do that really consistently at both those levels.
Agree. So talk to me about the technology side.
What we're trying to create is an interoperable data layer so that it's really easy to understand where one material moved throughout the supply chain. And what that actually looks like is making it really easy for different folks, starting with tree care services to the folks who actually move material, so truckers, to the folks who go from a tree to a log and then log into board, so sawmills, and then the value add manufacturers, so people who take boards and ultimately turn them into, a chair or into a big CLT panel that'll go into a building. Our goal is to make it really easy for each of them to move, source, buy, and sell material in the space. And what we really focus on is making it easy for sawmills to source salvage logs. We then help and make it really easy for wood truckers to do reverse logistics, to be able to access material, to be able to do that in a way that is really tech-enabled and utilizes advances in AI to make that simple and easy and really scalable. And so we do that kind of at every level in the marketplace. Today, we really do that for tree care services. We help them reuse their material. For truckers, we help them source loads and connect into sawmills. For sawmills, we help them source material, actually process and track their material internally, facilitating payments, and then sell their material. And then sort of for those value add manufacturers, we help them source that material overall. So that's the supply chain side and where our tech really plays. And then we connect all of those dots for those end customers. So we make it easy for the end customer to buy wood, and we use that technology upstream to really scale the supply chains to make it as sustainable as possible, to have data that can really back that up and validate it. And that's fundamentally what we're providing right now.
One of the things I've heard you say before that resonated so deeply with me, I thought was so interesting. You were talking about how you bring customers, let's say, onto your technology platform. And the approach that you were talking about in terms of sales was you were talking about this like participant-led sales process, which I thought was so interesting because you're creating something certainly that doesn't exist in this industry. I'm sure there's some parallels to draw upon from other industries. It's like you can joke about home building, like these are industries that largely still operate almost the same as they did 100 years ago. If there was a truck 100 years ago, there's a truck today. And so that's not an easy sale necessarily to say to someone running that kind of business, like, I've got all these ways I'm going to make your life so much easier. That can be a tough sell. That can be off-putting. It's a more nuanced type of engagement. Just talk me through that. Such a smart approach.
This goes into one of my fundamental beliefs about how we should be in the world, at least. How I really believe I should be is just deeply recognizing that you don't know everything. And I think particularly in a space where you're dealing with logs, you're dealing with milling, you're dealing with drying, you're dealing with all these different pieces, it's really complicated. It's not easy to make a physical good. So much nuance, so much expertise. And so the folks who are actually doing that, they know so much more than I do about the actual specifics of their day-to-day, of what actually goes into that. And I think our whole thesis is that if you come at this from a really genuine place of curiosity, saying, hey, we want to build something that is different, that is better. It's better for the world. No one is pro cutting down trees, as you're saying earlier. So there's a collective buy-in there. And if you say this is our North Star, we are trying to do this today, but we actually don't know all of the dots that connect here, and we need your help. It just brings people in a completely different way. And so our whole thesis there is when you're working at the sawmill step is saying, hey, this is what we can do today. We want to buy this material from you. We want to be doing this way more down the road. What would we need to do to get there? How do you think about this? And rather than spend the whole time pitching the material, instead, essentially pitch them the movement, get buy-in there, and then get their help, have them be part of actually trying to do this in a better way, because we know we've got tons of challenges, things that aren't perfect. And I think something that we found from engaging with folks is when you're honest about that, when you engage really directly and candidly, and you're part of that process with them, it completely changes that dynamic of a transactional corporate one to one that feels much more like, all right, we're building this thing together, and they have understanding for challenges or things that are still nascent within our product or platform, and they feel like they're part of it. And so it's a huge thing that I really believe has been a big part of our success to date and is critical for our growth here. We have so much more work to do in this space.
Can you give me an example along those lines of a company who's joined the platform and what they see as a result, or how business gets better or streamlined?
I'll give you one on each side. So a good example is a company like Room and Board, where we started with one SKU. We now have over 10 different SKUs of furniture lines utilizing different species for us. And one of the big things there is Room and Board cares a lot about investing in American supply chains, about sustainable forestry, about reusing material. They're a real leader in that space. And what we've been able to do for them is we've been able to make that process simple. Like fundamentally, Room and Board is an incredible furniture company. They know their customers, they know how to do design really well, they know how to deliver and manufacture furniture. They're not a materials company. They're not a forestry company. They're not interested really in sourcing, but they cared so much that they were trying to do that themselves. And what we've done is we've made that process really easy. So rather than them having to build the internal expertise and coordinate with all of these different folks who are salvaging material and all those different steps, we just make that easy for them. The wood shows up on time, it's got clear tracking and full chain of custody, and you're able to see that material. We also deliver a lot of expertise in terms of actually how do you utilize that material. So oftentimes when you're dealing with a waste stream, there's complexity. You have to think about using different links or processing that material differently. And that can be impactful for the furniture manufacturer and then also the end customer. Oftentimes it can lead to a better, more interesting, more unique, more beautiful product, but you have to know how to use that within the process. And so again, we deliver that expertise to them so that they don't have to figure it out themselves, because we've already figured it out and we have a lot of these supply chains already stood up and we really grow with them. So that's kind of the demand side, is again, making that experience better, making it easy so they don't have to actually go do it. And then the other side would be a great sawmill partner in North Carolina. They do a ton of work for us. We source a lot of material through them. And what we've really been able to do is help them start sourcing a lot of logs and then also really purchase for them. And that's a really new dynamic for sawmills. Normally, they have to source their own logs and then they're kind of selling into the commodity market. What we do is we deliver consistency with them because we've got big enterprise clients, so we're purchasing really consistently. And so we can make it really easy and clear that, hey, we're a very trusted partner there. And then they've experienced how much easier our platform makes it to source material. Trucks show up on time, you're getting automated texting. It's the same thing that you get as an individual when you get an Amazon package. It's just these are giant truckloads of material, and by making that easy and simple, they love it and they scale it and they want to use it for all of their trucks.
What's the way for me to think about this in terms of scale? Is it companies on the platform today? Is it geographies you're in? Like, how do you think about where you are and growth of the platform?
So we have about 500 different companies across the country who are part of our platform, and that comes from the source. So folks on the tree care service level who go, again, tree to log. We have truckers who help move material, and then also the processors who are going to go log to board or board to finished goods. So that's fundamentally how our platform looks today. We're always trying to grow that. We're really dense in a few regions. We're really dense in the Northeast. We're really dense in sort of the Mid-Atlantic. And then we've been really scaling into the Midwest, the Southeast, and the Pacific Northwest. And our goal is to really drive and have that density nationally. We're trying to build a much more circumspect, better supply chain. And that requires having resiliency, having a lot of different players at each of those different steps in the supply chain. And that's one of our fundamental challenges, is how do we bring on the right players at the right time? Our thesis there is if you can aggregate demand, if you have a big anchor customer who's purchasing a ton of material, you can then really start to bring on all of the different players upstream, because you're buying from them. You're creating immediate value. You're not trying to go to them and pitch them some new tech solution. You're saying, I want to grow your business. Here's how I'm going to grow your business. I want to pay you for your services or for your material. And then that really completely changes that conversation. So that's how we think about growing and scaling. Our atomic unit as a company is board footage. So what is our ability to source from a board foot perspective? What's our overall capacity across the country? That's what we really focus on.
Okay, board feet. How many board feet can we push through our system? More so than saying we've got 500 companies on the platform. We think the market ultimately is 500,000 companies on the platform. I don't know. Or it's companies that can help us get to X million or billion board feet. That's really the goal. And maybe that's fewer companies on the platform, but they're the right ones to actually help us achieve that goal. Like, how do you think about that?
Much more the latter, because the ultimate value add for us is, can we deliver as many board feet as possible of material that is best in class experience, better price, and that's better for the world. And so that doesn't mean getting every wood products business onto our platform. What it does is it means building supply chains. Another way we sort of conceptualize our business is supply chains as a service. And definitely part of that is having a lot of different companies. There's about 45,000 wood products companies in the US alone. We just expanded into Canada as well. So starting to see that market expand. There's some really big ones. Your Weyerhaeusers, your Georgia Pacifics, Sierra Pacific, huge vertically integrated customers. And then there's all of this other super fragmented industry. And so we're really trying to bring them on, but we do that selectively. And that's focused mainly on, can we get the right board footage and the right capacity at the right price and the right experience? And so that's where we really focus. I'm not focused on just a number of companies on the platform.
Yeah, understood. One of the things you've said that also really intrigued me, you've talked about the fact that it's almost taken as, let's say, conventional wisdom, that what companies think they're trying to do is just get rid of complexity, simplify, simplify, simplify. And yes, there is truth to that, but you've talked about complexity as a defensible advantage, almost a moat. If you can figure out all this complexity, right, that actually locks a lot of other players out of it for whom it's going to be very difficult. You know, you go raise either your next round or your next round, and suddenly you're a climate tech unicorn, and it's like, oh, we want to jump into Cambium space, and then that's not so easy. Talk about that dynamic.
Two things. It's a great question. I think about this all the time. The first is that at this sort of existential level, I fundamentally believe that this myopic perspective that we tend to have, where we hyper simplify a business into a singular product that is only there to maximize shareholder value, is part of the reason we are in a situation where our economy is not working equitably. It's not working for people. It's not working for our planet. It's very sort of short-sighted. And so what happens there is we've been sold, to me, a false myth of simplicity is the only thing to optimize for. And actually, when I think about changing a system, a much broader, better way to think about building a business, it's like, no, you better figure out where your material comes from. You better figure out all of those different pieces in your supply chain so that it actually works. I mean, this is something I'm such a fan of from Planet. You've really been very thoughtful from the start, right? It's not just like, oh, we're delivering a final product that's an OSB equivalent. It's like, no, we're thinking about actually what we're doing from the land up, and there's all of those different steps that come. And so I think the next generation of companies that we want to see, particularly in the material space, has to embody that. That's kind of piece one there. The other part that I think about a lot when you think about complexity is organizational complexity. And, you know, I'm an ultra runner. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to do hard things for a really long time. That's our goal as a company. It's like, we're not in this for a flash in the pan startup race. We're trying to build a next generation American wood products company that is big and is massive. And so what I always say to our team is we earn that complexity by being so focused and excellent in our process. We have a business model that serves a number of different customers. That doesn't mean that we invite complexity into our operations. We're super, super focused on simplicity there, and we have to really nail that in order to scale. That's how we think about it. I mean, I think there's lots of different ways that creates defensibility for us. We've seen that. It's a pretty hard thing to do and live that every single day, and know we have a lot further to go to really get to scale there. But ultimately, if you can solve complexity in a market by doing it holistically, I think there's something really, really big in terms of a moat there.
Yeah, I think that thesis is spot on. And I would imagine, just hearing you talk about it and reflecting back on how we thought about Planted, it's 100%. I mean, when we realized, like, geez, there actually is no supply chain for this climate crop. We're going to go create a new American agricultural supply chain like that. People just don't do that. And then that's going to be really hard for someone else to follow. And some of the companies you mentioned, it's going to be a little bit tougher for them to follow, never mind the production tech and some of the other things. But the composite picture, the holistic picture, becomes something that it's hard to even know from the outside what all the pieces are when you actually can take that very complex picture and then run the processes around it and do it very efficiently as you're describing. We could probably have another hour-long conversation just about that because I think that's so crucial. But I do want to make sure in the remaining few minutes we've had this amazing conversation about the business, which I really love, and the drivers of it and where it's going and the tech platform, which I think is super cool, which is why I want to talk to you. I do want to make sure we touch on the climate impact because we haven't actually even hit it in terms of what does it mean to substitute, to build this supply chain in terms of, I mean, it's twofold. You have something that's going to waste. So it's like, how can we not have this thing go to waste? It's going to go to landfill or get burned. That's an impact. And then we're going to have this substitution positive benefit by moving to these products versus what industry uses today. So in the time we have, just the last couple of minutes, talk me through that, how you've conceived it, what it looks like, what do you measure, what constitutes impact for Cambium?
The way to think about our overall impact is if you look at just wood waste, you're looking at somewhere between 1.2 and about 3.6 gigatons globally every single year. We've stored carbon in a material, and when we waste it, mulching is a great example of this. You cut it into really small pieces and you spread it out so it can off-gas as fast as possible. Not great from a carbon perspective. There are moments where it makes a ton of sense from a biodiversity perspective or sort of a land use perspective to utilize material that way. But generally, we do that way too much. And so that's one, is keeping carbon that's already been stored as stored carbon. And so that's really avoided emissions for us. When we can keep material stored, we're able to really drive impact there. The second is driving transportation. So if you think about how wood products traditionally work, we end up shipping wood across oceans all the time. We import tons and tons and tons of material. We actually export lots of logs. That doesn't make sense. Wood is heavy, particularly wet wood is heavy, and we spend a lot of our sort of emissions actually moving material around. So if you can move material 50 miles or 100 miles instead of 5,000, there's a huge carbon savings there. And then the last piece is really depressurizing forest loss. So a good example, and this is something we're really proud of, is if you think about one of the big drivers of deforestation in the Amazon, there's lots of different aspects there. Some of that is meat consumption and cattle. Some of that is tropical hardwoods, actually getting pulled out, like ipe, which is a tree that people use for decks and for outdoor material. It's incredibly hard. It's a really amazing wood to work with, but to access it, you have to cut down a significant amount of forest per tree. And so what we are able to do is we're able to replace that with thermal modification of a material like red oak, where you get almost the same properties. It's a tree that we're throwing away in our cities in the US. You don't have to ship wood across an ocean. And so from an impact perspective, that's all part of it. The last thing that we think about is how do we actually track that? How do we quantify it? What does that look like? Generally, we've approached carbon tracking from the wrong perspective. Like we do that forensically. We'll build a building, and then you try to go do sort of this retroactive analysis and understand what was the impact of that building. And I think it's our job as a materials company to really provide live dynamic carbon data from the front end. But to do that, and this is where, again, I think things have been missed in the industry, is most people who have approached that are like, okay, great, we need to track it, we need to get chain of custody. We need to go to the sawmills or the foresters and say, you need to tell us where this material came from. I think that's the wrong way to think about it because you're adding more work. And when you add more work into the industry, it creates complexity, it makes it hard. So our whole belief is if you can be part of the payments, and again, gather data around an actual payment, which people love to get paid. That's fundamentally something that is pretty true, pretty universal. If you can connect the payment to the environmental asset, you then get live data. And so when we are part of the transaction that goes from a tree care service to a truck, to a sawmill, to a drying center, to an end customer, what we have there is we have dynamic data on where that material came from, who it came from, how much of it was moved. You know what people don't lie about is how much material they just sold somebody, right? So if you're part of the invoice, it's a really credible source of data that then can allow you to understand what was the carbon impact, what was the overall life cycle impact. So our belief ultimately is to build out those dynamic data so you can actually, as a customer, make those choices, understand where my material come from on the front end, rather than at the back end trying to go evaluate it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think, again, it comes back to if you can organize the complexity, build the processes around it, you can create so much differentiated value that it really stands out in the market in a way where an end buyer is going to say, yeah, that's actually what I want. It's great to hear you talk about. It's inspiring. It's super cool, I think, quite literally. And I am going to be continuing to follow with great enthusiasm because I think you guys are just onto something so exciting. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I mean, really, really appreciate questions, insight, and all the leadership that you've brought to the industry. I mean, there's so much more work to do. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to my conversation with Ben. If you enjoyed it and appreciate the perspective Supercool brings to the business and climate conversation, please take a moment to like the show and leave us a review. It's the best way to help us reach others who would benefit from these conversations too. See you next time.